Welcome,
Hello.
guys.
Hey, how are you?
It's nice to see familiar names. Hi, Tina. Feel free. So I am not sharing my screen. I'm Christy Wall. I'm the speaker for the next half hour. You're stuck with me, like my poor students. So if you want to say hi in the chat, go for it. Another thing that I would like to encourage you to do if you want is change your name if you're a teacher to reflect the grades that you teach. So you can see now I'm Christy Wall dash 6th grade. Or if you're a Globe partner, you could put Globe partner. Or if you're a curriculum specialist, you could tell us the grades. That's really helpful for me just to kind of see who's here.
So, Christy, where do I change?
So if you go to, it depends on how you're viewing because we're in full screen mode, but however you see the other people's videos, right? You have to find your own video and you move your mouse and then there's two options that pop up and one is mute and the other has three little dots.
Oh, okay.
So click on the three little dots, excuse me, and you can rename yourself. You have to be a little careful if, depending on what you name yourself, because the name can carry over to other Zoom sessions. For example, my students often meet on Zoom on the weekend using their school accounts and change their names to silly things. And then when they try to join class on Monday, I won't let them in because their name is something silly. So that's just a cautionary tale. Excuse me. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. Today we're going to talk about data literacy. I capitalized in my middle school classroom because I want to emphasize that every classroom is different and everybody's students are a little bit different. So today I'm talking about things that work for me with my students. And I'll tell you a little bit more about my school as we get going. As we talk about this, if you have questions, I can see the chat. I have no problem being interrupted. So if you have a question, send me a message. Or if you want to unmute, as long as we're doing okay on time, that's cool too. So do you want to go to the next slide, Emma? Thank you. Okay, so we only have 30 minutes, but here's a quick overview. I'm going to tell you a little bit about who I am and why I care, why I'm interested in data literacy, and then I'm going to tell you 3 techniques that I use in my classroom. So I really like this pyramid diagram to the right because it helps me think about how I want my students to use data. What level do I want them to be in terms of data literacy? So as you're going to see from the next slide, because of my previous life, I have been in the green circle. I have created data sets with a whole lot of satellite data, and I've manipulated that data, sent that data to other people, created figures with that data, but that's not where I need my students to be, right? So for a middle school level, and I teach 6th grade, I want my students to be able to read data and evaluate that data. I want them to be able to find it, and I want them to be able to understand it. And really, with different kinds of data, my students will be on different levels in this pyramid. I put that this pyramid is from medium.com. I looked and looked and looked for the source of this pyramid because I think it's really cool. And I looked at the papers that this article cited, and this figure was not in the papers. So if anybody sees this figure and you figure out where it came from, please send me an email. All right, Emma, do you want to go to the next slide? So here's a quick introduction of me. This is me in my classroom in pre-COVID days. So I have a PhD in atmospheric science. I became a teacher through a kind of a weird path. I've been an environmental educator for 13 years. And for a lot of that, I was heavily involved in data collection using GLOBE protocols with my students. So I'm in my third year of teaching sixth grade. Fortunately, I only teach math and science because I don't remember a lot of parts of speech. I think I'd be in trouble if I taught English. And I am a complete data junkie. I have a Garmin watch. I freak out when the batteries run out and I don't know my heart rate and all that stuff. So I just really, really love data. And I love teaching my students about data. All right, Emma, thank you. So why do I care about data literacy? Here is a perfect example. So this summer I planned a trip home. I'm originally from Tennessee and I was traveling in different places in the Southeast and I was concerned with COVID. And so I saw this figure right here, these figures. So now I want to put up a quick poll. Look at these two figures and I want to know if you see a difference between them. So can you see a difference? So the options are yes, or no, or not sure. And then Emma, if you want to display, I won't be able to see the results if you, unless you or Katie, whoever's doing the poll, you can share the results in just a second.
We've got about 50% of people have responded so far, so we'll maybe give it another second.
And thank you to those of you who are responding in the chat too. I thought this was a pretty incredible example of data and people looking at data and in some cases possibly reaching the conclusion that they want to reach instead of maybe looking at the story the data is telling us. All right, 100% say yes, which is awesome. Not everybody can see a difference in this picture. So Emma, if you want to go to the next slide, you can see I actually stole this off of Twitter. And, you know, for us, as it is part of the scientific community, you can see really quickly that they changed the scale of the colors. Okay, this is something I always got in trouble for in grad school. My advisor was like, you changed the color scale. No, don't do that, right? So when I showed this picture to other members of my family who will remain nameless, they didn't see a difference at all because they weren't looking at what the colors meant, right? So this is my problem that I want to help solve with my students. I want them to see things like this and be able to look at the data and understand what it means by looking at all pieces of the visualization of the data. So next slide, please, Emma. Here's the problem. How do you teach middle school students about data literacy? Sometimes they don't seem to care about anything, right? Like, Dr. Wall, is data literacy on TikTok? Oh, I'm out then, right? So next slide. Fortunately, we have Globe to help a lot with this. And then can you go ahead and do next slide, please? Because Globe helps us with data collection. And data collection is one of the ways that I make data really interesting to my students. They love to be outside. So here's a story that I haven't told Tina yet. I think you'll really like Tina. A couple weeks ago, I was speaking with one of my students from last year. And last year with my class, when we were on campus, we went through the urban heat island story map on my NASA data. And my students at my school, they don't get a lot of science before sixth grade. And the concept of albedo was very confusing for them. And I had a student a few weeks ago that I was talking to who remembered what albedo was. And I promise you that this is because we did that story map and we went outside and collected our own temperature data on different surfaces, right? So data organization and visualization are two aspects of data literacy that my students get frequently in math. So they really struggle with data analysis and data interpretation. So that's what I'm focusing on for these strategies that I'm going to show you. So next slide, please, Emma. So my first strategy is to drive my students crazy with questions. So if you know me, I ask a lot of questions. I drive everybody crazy with questions, right? And the big question that I want my students to be able to answer is, for data analysis, is what story does the data tell? I ask this question for every single graph my students look at. regardless of the class. Next slide, please, Emma. So here's an example that I borrowed also from a story map on my NASA data. This is something that I did with my students a few weeks ago. And this graph shows the power dissipation index, right? My students barely knew what a hurricane was. A lot of them, most of them, could not tell the difference between a hurricane and a tornado. So something like the power dissipation index is a very complicated subject for them. They had no idea what that meant, right? So I give them this scary looking graph, and we start by breaking it down. What's on the x-axis? What's on the y-axis? What's the blue dashed line? What's the orange line? So what does this graph mean? What does it mean that power dissipation index and temperature move in the same direction? We spent about 15 minutes just looking at this, asking questions. I actually really like to start by setting my timer and saying, I'm going to give you 2 minutes to look at this super scary graph and find something that you recognize. And so for this graph, maybe it would be the year, right? Like maybe they're like, hey, it's got the year on, I don't have any idea what power dissipation index means, but I see the year and I know what that means. That's your starting place. And then you start asking these questions, and that leads you to what story is this graph telling us? Because if I just started out by saying, what does this mean? They're going to be like, well, I don't know. And they're going to immediately tune out, right? Next slide, please, Emma. So here, I do this exact strategy in all of my classes. For any time they see data, we talk about it, right? So here are 3 examples. The top one is from our science book, which is absolutely horrendous, it's awful. Over on the left, you can see an example from our math book, where there are times, this is putting rational numbers in order, and they have times. So we talked about, what do these times mean? It talks about a triathlon, right? My students don't know what a triathlon is. There's not triathlons in Española, New Mexico, right? So we start with the basics, and then we talk about the data so that they have the background they need to understand the data before we talk about what it means. All right, thanks, Emma. Next slide. I feel really bad to keep saying next slide, next slide. So here is a big point for me. If we analyze every single visualization of data that our students see, if we do it every single time, then data is not going to be scary. Graphs aren't going to be as scary. Tables aren't going to be as scary, right? So my goal is to produce awesome globe projects like the ones you're going to see in a couple minutes with Laura. So if I show them that this data is not scary, they're going to be better prepared to produce their own charts and make awesome globe projects. Okay, on the next slide. Okay, so here's another strategy, and this is writing, and my students are not good at it. So there are a couple things that I do to help my students write specifically about data. All right, next slide, please. So I like to take the story that the graph shows and turn it into a question. Okay, so one of the ones we did after we saw the hurricane graph, I said, how does PDI relate to sea surface temperature? Right, and we use this strategy called RACE. R stands for restate the question. A stands for answer the question. C stands for cite evidence, which that's a really tough one for my kids. And E stands for expand or explain your answer, right? So when I start this in my classroom, we do several together. Everybody at my school uses this strategy. I've seen some great examples from kindergarten, just talking about stories, and they're really fantastic. So when we start, I'll have them actually write out RACE and then answer. And then eventually through the year, we work to take each piece of this and put together a cohesive paragraph about the data, right? So next slide, please, Emma. So here's an example. And this is one of the ways that I used, again, the hurricanes story map. So for this question, using what you have learned about hurricanes as heat engines, write a paragraph explaining why hurricanes occur in this particular season. Use evidence from previous parts of this lesson to support your claim. So this is probably, I think this is the second time my students had done a race this year. So here's an example. And, this student didn't do a perfect job, but look at C. On the Hurricanes as a Heat Engine website, it shows you a hurricane simulator, right? So we're starting to be able to cite evidence to put together a really nice argument, right? And I think it's really important when I have my students write a race like this about a graph, if they can cite the actual data in the graph, then it helps me know that they're understanding the data, if that makes sense, right? So we talked about this as a class, and then they wrote this in Canvas and submitted it. Okay, can you go to the next slide, please? I think I have one more example of student work, which I want to skip. So let's go to the next slide. I think I'm talking too much. So I want to move on to data interpretation, because this is also really challenging for my students, right? So I want them to move from explaining what a graph shows, like, okay, I see that PDI and temperature move in the same way. So what does that mean? Because this is like a huge, huge, huge leap, especially for students like mine who haven't seen a lot of science in their early elementary years. Next slide, please. So I keep saying this, make sure they have the background to understand the data, right? That's super, super important. In your comments, everybody who's writing in the chat, you guys are saying the same thing, right? You have to start with what your kids know and build up from there. So then I want to help them summarize the gist of the data, right? My kids, especially this year, are really not good at summarizing. So if you could go to the next slide, this is kind of a roundabout explanation for my third strategy. But I'm using this idea of the gist. So this is a strategy that comes from AVID, which is a college prep program. It's way more than that, but that's where this originally came from. And I created this template so that to help my students summarize written articles, right? So they start by filling out who, what, when, where, why, and how, and then they write a 20-word sentence summarizing the gist of the article. So on the next slide, I have an example. And I also have, I was going to paste, I'm on full screen, but in a second, I will paste the links for these Google documents into the chat in case anybody wants to play with them or use them. So here's an example of what one of my students did. After we finished the Hurricanes as a Heat Engine story map, we read an article about the hurricane in Galveston in 1900. And together we filled out, we read it as a class. We filled out who, what, where, when, why, and how as a class. And then my students wrote the gist of the article. So this student wrote, there was a hurricane in Galveston, Texas in 1900, and people had no warning and died. So, if that's what you read, you would have a fairly good idea of what the article was about. So if you actually look up this article, it has some kind of graphic parts of it. So I selected only certain parts, if that makes sense. Yeah, I know the word is kind of funny at the end. So that's how I set it up, because I knew they weren't going to count their words unless they wrote each word in an individual text box. If you ever use this strategy in your class, go to the next slide, please, Emma. One of the things that I guess I didn't do a great job of explaining the first time was that the gist is supposed to be an actual sentence, right? So this student came up with some amazing words to describe what happened: strong, big, destroy, deadly, disaster, like a monster, just 3 words. So if you ever use this, make sure that you tell your students, by the way, this is supposed to be a sentence. I had an example for them, but I didn't write it out. So if I were going to do this again, I would write it out. All right, can you go to the next slide? So I've been using this since the beginning of school, really successfully for summarizing articles and writing. And a couple weeks ago, I thought to myself, I wonder if I could come up with something similar to summarize data. So 2 weeks ago, I created this worksheet. This is not a final worksheet. Yesterday, I tried this with my students. We looked at a really cool graph of climate normals compared to this year for the Albuquerque ASOS. And we talked about it because now we're learning about what weather means and what climate means. So I'm trying to come up with a way for my students to look at a data visualization and get the gist of the data visualization. So for these questions, I said, okay, we're going to look at the graph. We're going to look at the source. Where did it come from? Who created it? When did they create it? Is the data new or old? Why was it created? And so I'm trying to get my students asking these questions about data so that they can move from looking at the data, analyzing it, to interpreting it, right? And I had hoped to have some student examples to show you. And honestly, I just forgot because we just did it yesterday and last night I was working on a Nearpod. So we will share this link in the chat. And if you guys want to take this piece and test it out, if you're a Globe partner, send it to your teachers and get feedback. And I would really like to, I think maybe I need to add some lower level questions, like what's on the x-axis, what's on the y-axis, to kind of help my students in 6th grade. But this may be a really nice tool for students in high school who already are solid with that, right? So I would really love to get your feedback on this and helping students summarize data visualizations in a concise manner. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so now this says summary. I'm not quite done. First of all, I'm not an expert in any of this. A lot of what you're seeing, these strategies are like trial and error, especially because my school's on remote learning at least until January, right? Every class is different, but asking questions about data in all of its forms is really important. And I don't think it matters where you start those questions, right? If you start by saying what's on the x-axis, why does this go in increasing order of year? That's awesome. If your kids know that, ask, what does this mean? What does it mean that PDI and sea surface temperature move in the same direction, right? So because there are so many of us, it's really hard to have a meaningful discussion with everybody in one big room. So I do want to take 5 minutes in breakout rooms. My suggested prompts, I don't want to be like, talk about this, because I'm tired of bossing people around like that. But I think it would be really great for us as a community to talk about data and talk about data literacy in middle school. And if you would like, talk about these strategies and how you would use them, or talk about other strategies that you have used in the past. So, and then while you guys are here, I am going to grab those links and post them in the chat. So Emma or Katie, if you guys want to do breakout rooms.
Great. I'm going to open the breakout rooms now. Katie and Laura and Christy, don't join your breakout room unless you would like to. All right, last few people in here. You're welcome to join your breakout room at any point now.
You will have to click the join button to join that breakout room.
Emma and Katie, I don't think we need to do the last poll because I got really great feedback in the chat.
Great, sounds good.
Emma, I'm going to send a 1-minute warning as soon as we hit the 57. Or do we want to do the 60 seconds and close?
I went ahead and set up the 60 seconds and close.
Perfect. Okay, never mind.
So yeah, no worries.
Perfect.
If you want to broadcast anyways, please feel free to.
No, I think that'll be fine.
Okay. All right, I just shared the closing the breakout rooms.
Hey, Tracy.
Hi. Fun, Christy.
Did you just come back from a breakout room?
I did.
Yes. Lots of good conversation.
Good. If anybody wants to unmute, if anybody wants to share in the chat or unmute quickly, and I know we don't have much time left.
Too much to
Everyone else?
summarize in a minute and a half.
Yeah, yeah, there really is. Well, I hope that you guys all had productive discussion. Emma, if you want to go to the last slide, I do have my contact information here, both of my email addresses. So feel free to send me an email if you have any questions. Oh yeah, I'm going to post those resources. So the first link, and the way I figured out how to make it so it'll automatically ask you to make a copy, so you can just click on that and make your own copy for your own Google Drive. The first link is that first gist, the Avid one. And the second one is for data. And I believe that Emma and Katie have a way to get the slides to you guys. So if you guys want to send feedback, I wrote down, Lynn, what some of the ideas that Lynn said on my Post-it notes. I really appreciate feedback, especially on that second piece. And now I have to go teach science because it's my favorite class. And I would like to introduce you to Lara Kubiak, who is going to be giving the second half of this data literacy talk. She is a teacher at the Toledo Public Schools in Toledo, Ohio. So if you use, oh, it says you need permission to use those slides. I will change
Yeah.
that right now. Do all of the things to teach your students data literacy. They will be able to create amazing projects like Laura is going to show you right now. So thank you so much, you guys, for being here.
Thank you, Christy.
Thank you, Christy.
Well, hello, everybody. My name is Laura Kubiak. Thank you, Christy, for the introduction and for the fantastic presentation. You are a challenging act to follow. I really admire you and what you do. Thank you, Christy. And so I usually don't present in the Zoom format. My school district uses Google Meets. So Emma and Katie have kindly volunteered to manage the chat box for me so I can focus on sharing my slides. But Katie and Emma, feel free to interrupt me if there are questions. I'm happy to be interrupted. In fact, I'm used to it. So yes, as Christy mentioned, I am a teacher for Toledo Public Schools in Toledo, Ohio, USA. And I teach at a very unique and awesome school called the Aerospace and Natural Science Academy of Toledo, where I am a high school teacher in a career technical education program called Wildlife and Sustainability. This picture is pretty iconic for teachers right now. I sadly have not seen my students for 7 months. So I posted this picture on social media to them. And I tell them all the time that I love them and I miss them and I mean it so much. As a matter of fact, we just found out yesterday that our school district is not returning live until 2021. So I am continuing to adapt every day, and the GLOBE program is very much helping me with that. So that being said, I'd like to share with you my experience with GLOBE in high school research, and I'll tell you a little bit about my school. But like I said, I'm a high school teacher, and I am very, very passionate about conserving our planet's natural resources personally and professionally, and that's what I teach in my program. So my school is a magnet high school. It is a public high school, and there are two choices that students have. They can either go into an aviation pathway or a natural science pathway. So half of their day is spent with either aviation or natural science classes that are preparing them for either aviation or environmental careers. And the other half of the day is with their traditional core graduation requirements. And our natural science department includes animal science, urban agriculture, and as I said, my program, Wildlife and Sustainability, which is so very cool. We have a lab with thousands of gallons of water filled with aquaculture and aquariums. I just got a 1,000-gallon rain harvesting cistern and set up a 500-gallon marine tank. And we have 10 acres that are situated next to 23 acres of Metro Park, a botanical garden with a creek running through our backyard. So I intend to give the students a lot of experiences both in the aquatics lab and also in the field. So I'd like to take a poll. So Emma and Katie, if you could please launch a poll. I am wondering what you all think is the biggest challenge in conducting high school GLOBE research.
So we've got about 40% responded so far, so I'll give it a few more seconds before I close it. All right, I'm closing the poll now.
All right, so survey says, survey says the biggest category, all of the above. And that is exactly what my experience is, has been, and probably will continue to be. And I'm hoping that with a mixed audience of both teachers and Globe mentors and partners in this audience, that you can either kind of take some of my tips of how I've overcome these challenges to other teachers, or if you're a teacher, hopefully some of my experiences will be advice for you. Okay, so the challenge of funding and resources. So this is a photo of an empty classroom, and this is my school actually has 3 buildings, and so one of the buildings is brand new, very nice, beautiful furniture, but what happens when you don't have the funding and the resources? I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there for grants and opportunities to overcome this. And I would like to invite Dr. Jody Haney, who is going to share with you a way that she worked with my school and continues to work with my school very, very closely.
Well, hello, everyone. First, let me say it is a pleasure to be here talking about this project, and it's really a special pleasure to be at the school. I say every day I'm at the school is a good day. Every single day that I'm there is a good day because the students are really special and the teachers are phenomenal. So that has really been great. So we've been working with the school using a project that we call RISE or Rise Up, and it's funded through the Army. And every year we scale up a little bit. So the project has gotten bigger and bigger. At the beginning, our goal was really to do research with 11th and 12th grade students, and it was just the environmental branch of the school at that point in time. Since then, the school became kind of the merged school with the aviation program. So now our goal, if you look at the middle of the chart, is to do research with all students in the school, 9th through 12th grades, and to really think about STEM in a broader sense and thinking about aviation, then the animal science, the wildlife and sustainability, and the urban agriculture. So we've taken on a bigger piece. And around the chart, again, you can see kind of the 4 goals is that we have, the biggest goal is to support students, to mentor them in a lot of different ways. And when we mentor them, scientists come in to work with them. And I'm one of the lead scientists, I guess. I bring in my work with Globe and kind of take lead the process on helping students do research. Then we have Laura, who serves as our district coordinator, and she makes sure that the teachers are on board and that the school administration is on board and that everything's running smoothly. We have some school administrators that are on board. And then we even have student ambassadors, students who have graduated through this program that come back to help, and they've been phenomenal. Another one of the goals is sustainability. And really what we want to do is we want to make research embedded in the curriculum, that whole school curriculum. And we want to do that in an interdisciplinary form, which is another goal. You see the core science and the non-science teachers. So this last year, we had English teachers helping with the development of the poster and just paper creation and presentation skills. We had math teachers helping with the data analysis and the statistics. We had a Spanish teacher who had her PhD in social sciences who helped the students really create social science projects, create survey research around some of the topics that they were studying. So that was an added bonus to really get this research integrated throughout the whole curriculum. I noticed in the chat, someone said, why isn't this college prep? It's perfect for college prep. And we think so too. One of our grand goals in the future is to see if we can't get somehow some CCP courses, college prep courses, and actually we're thinking about somehow an associate's degree, helping kids take some courses here and move their way to a 2-year associate degree program. So that's kind of the pie in the sky goal that we have for down the road. And then obviously we're working to disseminate this through many avenues, one of which is Globe, but also students are doing some research projects in the Globe environment and also at their local districts. And this project showed up in one of the Globe newsletters, and we're doing some other, newsletters and presentations at other professional organizations. So that's it in a nutshell. So Laura, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jody. So yes, as you can see, my school has been very successful in finding resources and funding, and this is one of a few examples. And I just tell other teachers who are having a hard time finding the resources that there are grants and opportunities out there. You just have to reach out, especially within our Globe community, and ask. So I am so fortunate that there are even funds left over from the AEOP project from last year. So this is everybody's challenge right now. How do you navigate COVID and with meaningful learning, and how do we do that virtually? I was expecting my students to be back this week. So I had already gotten them all set up with the methods that they would follow for their research projects. And then, of course, like I said, it was just announced that we are all virtual. So we are shifting, and I was stressed out how I was going to get supplies to students. As you can see with this young man on the left, he walked to school 3 miles with a hiking stick, and he said it was his biggest adventure in the last 7 months just to pick up supplies for his research project. The bottom picture shows a family coming and loading up an aquarium out of my classroom since his daughter couldn't do it in our classroom. I'm so blessed to have families and students that are enthusiastic, and we'll figure it out. My principal will drop off supplies to students' houses, and we are just determined to break down any barrier that comes with virtual learning and making sure that they can collect their data from home. So therefore, my class with 14 students, every single one is set up to do a research project from home. They meet with me virtually, but they are all collecting data from home. As a matter of fact, here's a really fun example. So I reached out to the Globe Mission Earth team at University of Toledo and asked if they could help with some virtual learning. And I told them that I wanted to do a solar oven design challenge. And this was inspired by Alaska's science team. I've taken a couple of wonderful classes with them. And I just thought it was funny that Christy had mentioned that TikTok doesn't necessarily show off data literacy. Well, my students are, so they are finding ways to show Globe data through TikTok. So I will warn you, this is a little obnoxious and silly, but it just shows that the kids are into it and they're engaged. The student submitted 4 videos. I'm just going to show you one just to show that the student is showing her Globe data through her solar oven design challenge, which collects Globe data. So every hour they monitored air temperature and cloud data. And here's 60 seconds of the student's video. Oh.
Welcome back to the final part of the solar oven. Here we go. So we're gonna get our nice yummy broth out of the fridge. Uh-oh, no noodles, emergency store trip. Good. Finally, we got 2 packs of noodles. Perfect. Now we're gonna break those bad boys up and crunch them all up. Then we're gonna take our stinky little flavor packets and throw them. We don't need that yuck. And we have our own delicious broth we're gonna pour in there with our nice good chicken. Ooh, good. We're gonna stir that bad boy up. Oh, I wish I had more. And then we're gonna tape it shut. And then we're gonna add some foil on there, give a quick temp check, and throw it in our solar oven to cook. First temp. Alright, now we got it taped shut. Here's check number 1. And a dog break. Here's check number 2. Good. Here's our first cloud data. Check number 3. More cloud data.
Okay, so the students completely went through the entire scientific method at home designing their own solar ovens. And I know it was a very fast flash of it, but she did mention her cloud data and she showed her air thermometer. Another thing with COVID is figuring out, like Jody said, how do you disseminate this information? My students presented to NASA Glenn They presented virtually in May some of their research projects. And we are in the process of figuring out how we can host a socially distanced and safe symposium right here at our school. It'll probably be outdoors on a nice day, but we are going to be doing that, which is just a way to celebrate the students' work, no matter what the boundaries are. And this is highlighting one of our star students, Olivia Bibler, who did a fantastic job. I'll talk about her more in a little bit, but her project was very impressive. She was analyzing the harmful algal blooms of Lake Erie. So she started at thinking about how Northwest Ohio has so many farm fields and how these farm fields agricultural runoff is contributing to these algae blooms. So she was conducting globe soil protocols, collecting data to figure out a comparison between the roadside and the farm field side of the ditch and comparing the two. And this student went on to actually have an internship at NASA in Houston. Another huge challenge is how do you differentiate globe projects? So that could be across age levels, that could be across students with varying learning needs, huge variety. So through the last few years of my coworkers and I figuring out how to conduct research projects, last year we had every 9th and 10th grader doing their own research project. And we learned a lot from that. They weren't quite ready and they weren't quite independent enough to do that. So this year, instead of the open inquiry model that I just talked about, we're doing a more guided inquiry approach where we're giving them 2 possibilities that they could research. It could either be using the urban heat island effect campaign, or it could be there's an animal science project. And so the students kind of naturally picked half and half, but then they'll still each have their own project because they'll tell their own story and what it was like for them to collect the data and how they interpret it. And another way to overcome that challenge of differentiating projects is by generating enthusiasm and interest. So when students move more to the open inquiry model, they get to select topics that they are really passionate about. So that can be anything from dog training to designing a prosthetic leg for our 3-legged bearded dragon. I'm not kidding. And other students are interested in more of our globe projects, like this student who was very motivated to clean up trash in our creek and later do a project on that. I know that this is true to support their interests because over the summer, I had students emailing me about what they wanted their research project to be about in the fall. So we've done a good job by just allowing students to pick what they're interested in and supporting that. I even had students last year in the month of January collecting hydrology data and clearing trash out of the creek when it was 20 degrees in January. So they are very, very motivated. And don't worry, I actually had some funding to be able to purchase the proper boots for this student that kept her feet warm down to -40 degrees. Another way to really foster differentiating these research projects is through peer mentoring. The student I was mentioning, Olivia Bibler, she's the student that's taking the lead in around that round table. She was a 12th grader last year, and she asked me if she could mentor 9th graders through some globe projects. She was that passionate. And those students in the middle are learning from her about her comparison of the agricultural and roadside of the ditch. And then you can see the other 3 young ladies are so excited to collect aerosol data that they're hugging their calitu. They were just that excited. So the students that were the 9th graders that were mentored, I felt that their projects were more in depth by having a mentor, and they were more enthusiastic about it. So they kind of did like a subcategory to their 12th grade mentor. So they were also collecting soil data and looking at soil infiltration rates and thinking about how maybe the road salts were contributing to soil quality and eventually to maybe harmful algal blooms. Another way that we motivate our students, I think this is just the coolest example, through field experiences. The Globe Mission Earth team at University of Toledo took our 9th graders on a field trip to the Lake Erie Center of the University of Toledo. And the photo on the far left is a student named Serenity. She's, of course, collecting a water sample with our Globe Bucket protocol. She is now a junior. 2 years later, her research project, although everything has been through virtual instruction, her and her mother drove to Georgia to collect saltwater samples. So she sent me a picture just last week of her tossing a bucket into salt water. So you just never know from these field experiences, exposing kids to Globe protocols, where they might end up later becoming so interested that they're wanting to conduct their own research project on it. So I've talked a little bit about the big concerns that are in my region being nearby Lake Erie. We are very concerned about harmful algal blooms. So a lot of my students have conducted research there. So if you guys want to just have a sidebar question to answer in the chat box, I'm wondering what some of the student research questions are in your region. So as I said, that generates a lot of hydrology projects. I think I'll skip past this slide. So an example, this photo in the center right here is a photo of the student collecting trash in snow and bringing it back into the classroom to further analyze her trash collection in our school's creek. And she was collecting turbidity data and using a rain gauge to collect precipitation data and correlating that to see if there was an increase in trash when there was an increase with precipitation. Okay, another huge challenge that I often feel is when I'm encouraging all of these students to do research projects on whatever their interests are, I'm really opening myself up to a million different topics where I know I'm not going to be an expert in these topics. So I thank God for my Globe mentors, the Globe family, because amongst us, one of us has the answers. So there's Kevin Sikowski mentoring some of my students in person back in the day when we could do that. And then there's Tina Hart on the computer meeting virtually from Virginia at the beginning of last school year, mentoring my students through their research project ideas. So I just keep encouraging everybody to become involved in Globe if they're not already. And if you are involved, to really just continue to reach out to each other. And here's an example being connected to Dr. C. I had a student who wants to be a meteorologist. And so he was studying contrails. And my school having the aviation and the natural science connection, our two facilities are 13 miles apart. So he easily had a comparative study where he could investigate the contrails nearby the Toledo airport versus the contrails that were 13 miles away and more of a park setting, like in my school. Dr. Haney kind of mentioned this already, but I'll just touch on it very briefly. I'm very fortunate that we can have such a team effort at our school. We have almost every single teacher and every single discipline looking at these posters. And these photos actually show how, even though we have a bell schedule changing subjects every 42 minutes, some days we'll get rid of the bell schedule and have students sit in different pods throughout the school and working with whichever teacher mentor they need that day. So I recognize that I have a very awesome experience and opportunity there. And it's really an opportunity to tap into every single teacher and what their interests are, and kind of almost being like a cheerleader for the other teachers to be involved in whatever their interest is. So for example, this teacher, Jenny Kuzno, is our English teacher, and she has a pond in her backyard where she manages the varying fish species and the native and invasive plants. And so we actually had a field trip to her house to learn more about that. And you can see Thomas on the right-hand side collecting globe data through his tablet. So I believe wholeheartedly in being able to overcome these challenges. I hope that some of my examples have been ways to encourage either you, if you're feeling like you're going through those challenges, or maybe if you're mentoring somebody else, you can share some of these examples. We have documented proof that it does work. The grant that Dr. Haney was referencing, we had the opportunity to pre and post survey the students and the teachers. And I mean, the students gave a lot of really powerful feedback, and you can see just in some of the photos, like how happy and proud they are to be presenting their work. So you can just kind of browse through some of their comments in the center. And then on the right-hand side, those graphs are talking about how teachers actually increased the amount of time that they would spend on research projects and their confidence after going through a couple years of collaboration with other teachers working on research projects, many of them which were Globe. And to be more specific, how many of those projects were Globe? I just kind of started collecting some numbers from last spring and from this fall. Even though we're virtual, we will have 22 students working on the Urban Heat Island Effect campaign and one in the trees around the world. I already mentioned our solar ovens, 12 students did that, and 14 students produced posters last year using Globe protocols. And we had 12 students that, I collected the water samples, and my principal and I either delivered them to their houses or some families came and picked them up from our parking lot. And then for the rest of this semester, out of my 14 students, 8 of them actually selected to focus on research projects that were Globe oriented. So I do hope that if you have any questions or comments that you email me. I've posted my email address. I thank you very, very much for your time. And I just say thank you to the Globe community in general, because without you guys, I would not have as meaningful of a time teaching virtually. Thank you very much. I think we actually have a couple minutes left for questions.
There's been a lot of comments in the chat, but I think that I don't think there's any questions missing yet.
Okay, well, if you think
Hey, Laura, I actually have a question. This is Peter Nelson. Since nobody else is speaking up, I thought I would finally.
so good to
I
see you.
usually stay quiet in these, but I was curious, you were talking about the career technical education part of this, and I was curious if you align or show your students the career technical education goals and sort of the different tracks that they can take, because there are like the skills that go into, say, being a geographic information scientist or a computer scientist or other things like that. So I was kind of curious if you could help us link those technical skills to Globe. How are you making that connection between those two so that students are getting the skills from Globe that they can, but they're also understanding the career aspects of where to go and maybe how they end up at a place like NASA or the Forest Service or other places like that?
Whoa, that's a good and big question.
Hey, that's me.
Well, I'll try to answer that quickly, but I think you and I might have to stay in touch after this. But super quick, our school district actually has a program that we run with our 8th graders where we survey them, and we pretty heavily recruit for our career technical programs in my school district because we have 35 career tech programs. And our career tech programs are not like the old vocational term that you think of. They are often college prep. They prepare students either to go right into a job or off to college or into the military. And so by the time students have gotten to me, they've kind of already figured out that they're interested in a natural science career. But the Ohio Department of Education has 16 career pathways, and the natural resources pathway, which I teach, is just one of them. And yes, GIS is a skill linked within there. And the Ohio Department of Education gives us like 14 pages of competencies that we are to teach with each of our career tech classes. So I hope that roughly answers your question, but we should talk more, Peter.
Thank you, Laura. That does. It's one of these, I think, great opportunities for all of us to think about, these skill sets that are laid out and that provide pathways for students, and then what they're doing with the Globe program and those pieces actually help them along those ways. So thanks, Laura. Appreciate that.
Thank you. Okay, our time is up. Thank you, everybody, so much for attending. Jody Haney, thank you very much for the invitation to present. And to everyone on the NARM team, you guys rock. Thank you, everybody.